If I could ask the council members to All right, why don't we resume our hearings here? The next department, I know other members will be coming in. Next department is Department of License and Inspections. Good afternoon, Commissioner and folks. As you know, we have your written testimony, so whatever you'd like to say, and then we could get to questions. Good afternoon. Yeah, please, start.
Good afternoon, Council President Clark, Councilman Greenlee, and members of City Council. I am David Perry, Commissioner of the Department of Licenses and Inspections. Joining me today is Kirk McLaren, our Administrative Services Director. You already have our formal written testimony, so I'm just going to take a few moments to talk about some of our accomplishments and highlights over the past year and our plans for the upcoming year. Building construction continues to boom in the city. In 2018, we issued a record 58,206 construction permits, which represents an 8.2% increase over the previous years. Our revenue increased 10.5% to a record $66.2 million. Looking into the future a bit, this calendar year is off to a good start with construction permit issuance up 15% and zoning permit activity for the fiscal year up a whopping 32%. And as you know, zoning permit activity is a leading indicator of future construction activity. Through an aggressive enforcement program, a well-funded public demolition program, and an uptick in private demolitions, the number of unsafe buildings has now decreased since the start of the Kennedy administration by 22%, and the number of imminently dangerous buildings has decreased 61% to an even 100 properties. We continue to build a better building department as we opened a new district office on Cecil B. Moore Avenue last year, and we will finish our expansion plans this year by opening a new district office to better serve the residents of Southwest Philly. The total headcount in the department increased over the past year from 375 employees to a current 405 employees. In the upcoming year, we look forward to our role in the Mayor's Roadmap to Safer Communities initiative by using blight removal as a violence reduction tool. We're asking for funds to hire and equip an additional clean and seal crew, increase building demolitions, and cleaning green vacant lots. Those new resources will be dedicated to the highest crime areas of the city. We also look forward to an expansion of our Audits and Investigations Unit that will focus on inspecting contractor business practices to determine whether they are using city-licensed subcontractors, employing workers who are qualified and have OSHA certifications, making sure they're keeping their insurance policies current, and working within the scope of their issued construction permits. Thank you for the opportunity to present our budget today. My staff and I are available to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you, Commissioner. Let me relay a couple of the Council President's questions here. Right at the end of your testimony, you talked about, excuse me, the plan to reduce blight by cleaning and greening lots. Now, when planning and development was in here, we talked about PHS's land care program that's being reduced. Is what you're doing making up for that, do you know, or is that separate? Or
Yeah, our initiative is separate from that, and we have a $1.75 million ask. A piece of that will be to hire and equip the new clean and seal crew, so they will clean and seal up vacant buildings within the targeted areas. The cleaning and greening, we are sending money over to CLIP, and our plan is to have CLIP do the majority of the cleaning and greening of the vacant lots and putting up the wooden fence. CLIP, in their ongoing maintenance of these lots, will be utilizing and hiring community members as part of that effort. So and the third part is that we have some additional demolition money to also to target unsafe and imminently dangerous buildings within those targeted areas.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that hiring people from the community, that sounds like part of the land care program. So I guess we just have to work out if that's what you say. It's separate, but it sounds like some of it is the same things, you know.
Yeah, it's a similar program. I'm unaware of any cuts or
Okay.
what the
No,
program
I know
is
that's
for.
not your world. Yeah, right, okay. In the budget detail, you show approximately 54 departmental vacancies. Are these in particular areas, and are there plans to fill some of those vacancies? Or?
Yeah, I'm going to ask our Administrative Services Director, Kurt McLaren, to speak specifically on that topic.
Thank you. Could you just state your name for the record, please?
Good afternoon, Kirk McLaren, Administrative Services Director for Licenses and Inspections. In the increment run noted in the budget detail, it showed 376 filled positions. We're happy to report since that time, we are now at 405, and what helped us get there was the recent hiring of 14 additional building inspectors 2 weeks ago.
And what contractor? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Building inspectors.
Building inspectors,
Yes,
oh, okay, I'm
yes.
sorry. Yeah.
And in addition to the 14 new building inspectors, we actually started 10 new code enforcement inspectors this week on Monday. So we're now at 405. We have some more vacancies to fill that will be coming later this fiscal year, and we're looking forward to that as well.
Okay, all right, thank you. Lastly, for me, at the bottom of your written testimony, you talk about coordination with the law department's code and public nuisance litigation unit, and you say, as a result, judgments and obtained and settlement monies collected continue to increase. Well, we always like to hear about more money. Do you have a figure on that, or approximate figure of how much more will come in because of that collaboration?
I can give you some of the historical numbers.
Okay.
So back in 2015, the amount collected was $949,000, and in 2018, it expanded to $10,004,000. So it was better than a tenfold increase
Okay.
over 4 years.
Okay. And you say you work in partnership, the law department works in partnership with L&I. Does that mean like you're trying to get this, maybe things to court faster, that kind of thing? Is that what you mean by it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We have a former high-level law department attorney now working for licenses and inspections,
Oh, okay.
running our code enforcement unit, and the communication and the flow of work from one department to the other has improved.
Okay.
The number of cases that are now being heard through the court system has increased from 5,961 back in 2015 to 8,009 in 2018. So we're getting
Significant
efficiencies
increase,
out of
right.
the effort.
Yeah. It's a shame that's that many violations out there, but maybe as people find out that you're taking them to court faster, maybe some people will pay more attention to law, we hope, anyway. You know.
From your lips to God's ears.
I got you. Thank you, Commissioner. Councilwoman Parker, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and hello to each of you. Let me start, Commissioner Perry, for one, publicly commending you for your responsiveness when we've called on you for issues in the 9th Councilmatic District. And, you know, I've said in those meetings, and I want to say it publicly to you on the record, you come yourself personally to those meetings, and you could definitely just send a member of your team. So we want you to know that we appreciate that. I also want to give a special thanks to Sarah Kaiser, who has hit the ground running. She transitioned this year. She's been very patient and responsive, and she's already attended some meetings. Betsy Baldwin, Maureen Blaney, and Sean Faulkner. He's attending most of our budget briefings and town hall meetings. And the reason why it's important for me to get that on the record is, Commissioner, if they were not responsive, we would be letting you know that too. So I think it's important for us to acknowledge when we get it right. I want to start where I left off during last year's budget hearings and ask you, how are we relative to the unpermitted construction activity, illegal car washing locations, and nightclubs, and as it relates to the illegal conversion of single-family dwellings into multifamily units? How are we measuring there?
Yeah, well, we have our nuisance property unit headed by Tracy Ruffin that leads up the efforts on illegal nightclubs and other illegal occupancies. It's a constant struggle because we find one today and issue a cease operations and they pop up somewhere else, a few weeks later. It's an ongoing effort, an ongoing commitment to find illegal occupancies, and to we work closely with the police department and shut them down as we find them. I don't have specific numbers to offer to you today, but I can get you a breakdown of the activities of the nuisance property unit so you can see their productivity over the past year.
I asked that because you members of your team were in the 9th District where we had definitely what was a tragedy on Walnut Park Drive when plumbing work was being done by a private contractor who had failed to get all of the permitting required by L&I, and it did end in a tragedy. I know both Councilman Heenan and Councilwoman Bass have both introduced some legislative prescriptions that can hopefully move us forward. But for me, I am sounding the alarm to my constituents that skilled labor isn't cheap, and cheap labor isn't skilled. And when people are making you an offer that you can't refuse, you need to figure out how and why they are able to offer you labor for such a low price. With that being said, I want to know, how are we working when we find unpermitted construction activity? Are we working with our labor department here in the city of Philadelphia to sort of make a connection between the misclassification of employees and wage theft? So when L&I goes out and you realize that there's unpermitted construction activity going on, do we then report that information to our Labor Standards Board?
Yeah, when we find unpermitted work, our reaction is to issue a stop work order. When we find through our audits and investigations unit that there's unlicensed contractors, we also can shut the job down. If there's folks there that don't have a basic Philadelphia business license, we make referrals over to the Revenue Department. But our main authority is to do code enforcement, as opposed to working with labor to get into the specifics of whether they're getting a living wage or not. That's really outside of our jurisdiction.
I want to humbly request, Commissioner, that we potentially look into when we find that there is a unpermitted construction activity taking place, that our Department of Labor Standards, and I know that's paper sort of intense, but it ultimately costs the city much needed tax revenue, because in my district in the 9th, I represent the Olney community, one of the most diverse in the city, and most times those workers who are misclassified as independent contractors, they often are immigrants who live in the 9th Councilmatic District, and they are being taken advantage of, and it's also theft from the city. So that would be something I would like to see if we can find a way for the departments to just communicate with each other on that issue. The next question is that last spring I was pleased that my office worked with you on a bill 180348. Thanks, Mike Fink, for your help on this one. And it requires dumpsters on private property to be enclosed in order to help to combat short dumping. How is the enforcement of the bill coming along? And in order for it to work, the enforcement is key.
Yeah, the way we're enforcing that bill is that if we get complaints of a dumpster on private property that is a constant nuisance, that is visible from the street and causing a problem, we will issue that specific violation. We're not going across the city and making every dumpster have to be enclosed, because the vast majority of businesses out there are responsible. They do the right thing. It's the ones that can't seem to get their act together that really need to have to put the screening in front of the dumpster in order to contain the litter and the debris that comes out of them. So we're handling it from a complaint basis and from an individual basis, depending on the severity of the problem.
Finally, Commish, talk to us about Eclipse. When will it be sort of completely up and running?
Okay, Eclipse, Project Eclipse has 4 phases. The first 2 phases are up and fully operational. The Phase 1 was for business licenses. Phase 2 was for trade licenses. So anyone in the city of Philadelphia that needs to obtain any type of business license can do so online. It's helped us reduce the renewal time for key licenses down to about 5 days. It's made it a lot easier. We've had about a 7%.
How long did it normally take? You said we're down to 5 days. Prior to this, Commish, how long did it take us?
And some of them, it took over 2 months, because we would get a huge backlog of mail that would come in, because people can only renew through the mail or waiting in line. And when you get those types of backlogs, it takes time to process them. So we're now down to 5 days for even our our largest licenses. So to answer your question, there's 2 other phases. Phase 3 deals with permit issuance, and Phase 4 is for the inspections and code enforcement. We're happy to report that we're in the final testing phase for the permit piece. We expect to be able to issue permits before the summer's out, and to basically wrap up this project by the end of the summer.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Bass?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So I just had a couple of L&I questions, and I did want to first start out by saying thank you so much for all of your hard work, for always being available and accessible when we reach out to you and to your office. And it really is a pleasure to be able to work with L&I. I've worked with a few L&I commissioners since I've been here. I think, I'm trying to think, probably about 3. And, you've just really done a great job as a commissioner. I just want to say that.
Thank you very much, Councilwoman.
You're very welcome. And now for the questions. Can you talk to me about the number of building collapses here in the city of Philadelphia? And we had introduced a bill that would support increased funding for more inspectors to inspect active job sites, and also to do to enforce stop work orders. And we had talked a little bit about this. And I'm just trying to get your perspective on how this could potentially affect construction here in the city of Philadelphia. I think that the number of building collapses that we're seeing is of great concern, and I know that you all are working hard to address it. But I do think that we have to put more money in for inspectors, for the stop work orders, for enforcement. And if you could just speak to that a little bit further. I know you did make some remarks about it in your opening comments, but anything additional that you'd like to say on that?
Yes. So in terms of the overall staffing for the department, we increased from the start of this administration to where we are now, from 42 to 74 building inspectors that do the construction inspections. It's a 76% increase. We are concerned about the recent collapses that have occurred.
Right.
In any given year, our emergency services unit, they respond to about 1,000 complaints that we get, or 1,000 service requests for a wide variety of structural issues. A relatively common one is, believe it or not, is a vehicle driving into a building, but we also respond to full collapses or materials falling from a building. So the total population is about 1,000.
Okay.
Now, what we found interesting with what we're seeing now, which is basically related to excavation failures. And this has been trending upward over,
Yes.
I would say, about the last 15 months. And to give you the basic background, what we think is behind this is the parts of the city have experienced a records amount of rainfall over the past 15 months. And what that does is it saturates the soil. So if you're excavating, if you're digging a trench, if you're digging out a basement to create additional living space, when the soil is in a saturated condition, that type of operation is far more dangerous than it otherwise would be if the conditions were dry. So the recent collapses that we've seen, and there were 2 pairs of houses that collapsed and had to be demolished, Fishtown and Kensington. Both of those were related to the developer digging out the basement. So they weren't demo jobs. These were jobs in which developers went, dug out the basement, and what they did not underpin the cellar, the basement walls.
So can I ask you a question?
And basically caused the collapses to occur.
So can I ask you a question? When we have heavy amounts of rainfall, do we do anything on the permits that are issued to say, like from this time period until this time period, because of the saturation, we should not, is that a part of the thought process at L&I that maybe we should not issue the permits to allow that type of construction?
Well, it's the kind of thing that if you had a competent engineer on the job, and we require that when you're doing underpinning work,
then it would make a difference.
They can recognize and understand what you need to do. The problem comes up when the contractor, the developer looking to save a buck, cut corners, and they go and do this work because it's a lot cheaper to do it without engineering oversight than it is to do it the right way. So for instance, if you're digging out a basement, basically you have to do it in 3 separate stages. So you're digging out a piece of the below the wall, you have to pour concrete, then you dig out another piece, you pour the concrete, and then you go on to a third section. So it's basically causing, if you're to do it right, it'll be about 3 times the cost of some of these excavations that we're seeing, in which the contractors, out of greed and ignorance, are taking shortcuts and putting the public at risk.
Now, let me ask you another question. So one of the situations that happened in my district on Johnson Street, I think it's the 500 block of East Johnson Street, and your office, was right on the scene when we realized that, the collapse was happening. But it seems as if the contractor or the developer through the contractor may have exceeded the scope of services that was supposed to be performed on the site based on the permit. So they said that they were going to do one thing and they went beyond that, and that caused the collapse. And again, when you don't have the level of experience that you need on the job, that's actually what happened. And so how do we prevent those sorts of things? I know you can't have an inspector on every site at every time, at every moment, but how do we get in front of folks who are, well, L&I's not here, they won't know that I did X, Y, and Z, and the next thing you know, the whole doggone thing came down?
Yeah, that's a great question, Councilwoman. So what our strategy is, it's multifaceted is what we're trying to do. First of all, when a builder or developer causes a collapse, we have to treat that as more than just a building code violation. So we've reached out to the district attorney's office, and they are interested in these type of failures, because if there were injury or death that would have occurred, there certainly would be a criminal investigation. Just because the developer or contractor got lucky and didn't kill or harm anyone doesn't make his intent any less egregious. So we've developed a relationship with District Attorney Larry Krasner. We've sent 2 recent cases over there for criminal investigation. So we need to really raise the bar, that if you're going to willfully, knowingly try to beat the process by doing work outside of the scope of permit, you got to realize that there's really extreme implications for that. We're also revoking the contractor's license, and in our budget request for additional personnel and resources for our audits and investigations unit, they will be doing audits of contractors' business practices. And what we believe happens out there, there's a correlation between how a contractor runs his or her business and the competency of the job site and the safety of the job site. So if we have contractors that are hiring unlicensed subs that are hiring day labor, that are not hiring folks that are OSHA certified, that aren't keeping up with their insurance. We're trying to approach it from that perspective. And those kinds of activities, those types of audits, are not something that the normal building inspector who's out there to look at the physical structure can do. So we're greatly beefing up what our audits and investigations unit does, and we're hoping that that method will lead to better compliance throughout the industry.
Now, when you say you're beefing up the audits and investigations, because that was actually my next question, was around, inspectors who are out in the neighborhood. Like when I'm driving through my district, as you know, I could be on the phone with you for the entire time, just kind of reporting and checking in about things that don't look right, that probably shouldn't be. 9 times out of 10, we're accurate in that assessment. And so when you're doing your audits, how does that happen? And are there inspectors who basically walk a beat, or, how do they go out and recognize the illegal construction that's happening? Because there's just so much of it, and I think that one of the problems we have is that as a city, prior to you or the last commissioner, there just has not been the level of enforcement, for the last few decades here in the city of Philadelphia. It's not just L&I, it's across the board in so many different departments that we just don't have the ability to enforce all of the rules and regulations. And so people feel like they can just kind of do what they want to do. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so a typical or regular building inspectors, their job, their typical workday is involved in getting calls from the permitted jobs to do code-required, legally mandated inspections. So most of their day is taken up with appointments. They need to be somewhere at a certain time. They need to perform a certain inspection. They have very little time in their regular day to do patrol-type inspections. But what we've reestablished in the department was patrol inspections on weekends to look for unpermitted work. The Audits and Investigations Unit, they weren't originally charged with looking at the scope of work that's occurring, but we've added that to their list of duties that they're going to do. The other key thing out there is, regardless of how many people we put out on the street, there's 2,500 miles of roadway in Philadelphia. We can't see it all. So what we're trying to do, and part of this idea came out of working with your office, is to develop better relationships with community leadership who can give us information on where shady construction is occurring or where work is occurring and no permits are posted.
Right.
And we've been very successful recently in an area and a group called the River Wards Coalition. They've been giving us some really good information that has led to us finding basement dig-outs without permits and other unlicensed or unpermitted activity. And when the time comes, we would like to try to replicate that type of effort, that type of relationship with community leadership up in Northwest Philadelphia, because that's an area of the city that we're starting to see an increase in construction activity. So the same issues that occur in Fishtown and Point Breeze are going to occur in other areas. This time we want to be ready for it and forge those relationships. So we have a methodology that we're working with the community groups up in Fishtown. We need to also do the same thing down in the Point Breeze area, and the next one to go would be up in Northwest Philadelphia.
Well, I really appreciate that, and I appreciate your approach to, making sure that you reach out to folks in the community and that they're a part of reporting what's happening in the neighborhood because they know best. And, I called you recently about something that was just really strange and odd. There was, somebody who, on a single family house, or it was like a twin On the side, they have put in like kind of carved out a door and, made another apartment, like all kinds of crazy things, and it looked like a homemade fire escape of some sort. And it's like, did no one in the neighborhood see this happening, when it was happening, when it was being constructed? So of course people did, but nobody said anything. So I really do applaud you for making sure that you reach out and connect with the folks in the neighborhood who are paying attention by, going to community meetings and letting folks know, kind of like if you see something, say something. Even on these kinds of projects, we need to know what's happening. So, but I thank you for your work.
Yeah, you're welcome. And like I said, the idea to forge these kinds of, we're calling it community code enforcement initiatives, really came out of working with you and the interns that you put together.
Oh, great.
We did some business surveys. We said, hey, you know what? We can do force multiplication by establishing strategic relationships with community leaders. So
Great.
that gives us eyes on the street.
Yes.
The people in the neighborhood are there 24/7.
Yes.
Our building inspector, if he gets down the street for a 5-minute look once every week, is certainly not going to see what the community sees on a regular basis.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman. Thank you, Commissioner. Chair recognizes Councilman Heenan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and President. Commissioner, thank you for your testimony, and I too want to echo a lot of what my colleagues had said about the job that you chose to take as at a high level public servant in the city of Philadelphia for many years. The daunting task of reforming our L&I department and making the processes work for the people in a safe and productive manner. That being said, I just wanted to say I think we're in the right direction. I want to state that in 2013, Mayor Kenny, who then was Councilman Kenny, and myself, and this body passed a law that made certain requirements, and it made the distinction clear in writing what was, who was legally allowed to be on a job site performing work. You are either a licensed contractor or an employee of a licensed contractor. So 1099 is out of the equation. So you are a licensed contractor, which means you have to have all your business licenses, tax ID number, insurance, and many other requirements. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
All right. And what is required of an employee of a licensed contractor? Can you explain that?
Yeah, we don't go specifically into what the employee's relationship is, but if you're on the job site, you have to be shown as an employee of the contractor. You have to have an OSHA 10 certificate. If you're doing specific skilled work, you need to be licensed or certified in that specific area. We don't get into looking at whether or not the employee has paid taxes. That would come under another department, but we do make sure, and exactly as you said, there are no 1099s. You're either a direct employee or you're a contractor yourself.
Right, and this is an effort to crack down on the independent contractor scams that's been going on, that's been defrauding our city of tens of millions of dollars yearly on what we're calling now over the past several years the underground economy. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, I don't have an estimate on how much money is left uncollected by contractors that are unlicensed, that pay their employees in cash, that don't pay the city's wage tax. That would not be a number that I would be privy to.
So in that 2013 legislation, it also states that somebody who pulls a permit cannot sell that permit to somebody who is not licensed and doesn't pay taxes and is not OSHA trained and doesn't have any employees. It's the cash business that we're calling the underground economy. So would that be a fair statement? Third-party permits are illegal?
Yeah, we detest that type of relationship. If you receive the privilege of a contractor's license, you have to act like a contractor. You can't go and sell it to a third party and abuse the system.
Right.
And that's one of the prime focuses of our audits and investigations unit is they'll look for contractors They get licensed and show that they have no employees. And then those jobs come up to the top of the list of the ones that need to be audited. Because if you don't have any employees and you're not doing the job yourself, then who are these subs? Who are these people on the job site?
So with that legislation in 2013, there's also some other requirements by law, and including posting the signs of licensed contractors, whether they're a general contractor and prime contractors and subcontractors, on the job site in visible view of the general public. Is that, to your understanding, correct?
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay, so what is the checklist of an inspector when they go out to a job? What do they look for? So this is law. Do they look for these points of interest, or are they looking to, can they write violations for laws that are on the books that need to be enforced when they visit a job site?
Well, the building inspectors that are there to do the permit inspection, their primary focus is to look at the finished product, to look at the product that's being built. They really do not have the time or the skill set to go look at what the relationships are in terms of the subcontractors on the job. That's why we created this audits and investigations unit, who will go out separately and can look at the business practices. So we've tried to clearly separate the construction inspection from the review of the business practice.
So let me fast forward, and I'm going to go back and forth and start to put things into context. All right, on what I call us leaving a whole lot of money on the table, where we're being defrauded as a city of its revenue that it deserves. Earlier this year, I introduced a bill and a resolution to have hearings on increasing the amount of inspectors. Now, it's a mandatory minimum, all right, that is negotiable, all right, but it's a ridiculously high number of 800. I understand that. But it also creates a contractor review board, which is something similar to your audits and investigation department. But I feel we don't have enough inspectors. As you were just indicated, you don't have enough time. Do you know how many properties are in the OPA address for the city of Philadelphia? Roughly?
It's somewhere 550,000.
That's correct, like 570-some thousand OPA addresses in the city of Philadelphia. And we just had an increase of 74% in our inspectors to 74 on the commercial side. Is that correct?
That's on the building
The
construction
building
inspection.
construction.
Right. That's
So
correct.
that's 74. And you get 1,000 complaints on properties. My point is, you have almost 600,000 properties, addresses in the city of Philadelphia. You have a very competent, overworked, understaffed enforcement in L&I, and not enough time to even look and ask if there's a sign, to write a violation, to report a violation, or the technology to do so, and turn it back into revenue so we can capture this revenue. So I'm very concerned with that. In your budget, in your conversation here, you say that you collect $66.2 million. Is that correct?
That's correct. That was for last year.
$66.2 million. What is your operational budget? Is that like around $28, $27 million?
Good afternoon, Councilman Kirk McLaren, Administrative Services Director. The proposed FY20 budget is approximately $40.6 million.
46, okay, great. Of that, what is demolition?
Demolition is just under 11 million.
Okay, so just under 11 million. So take 40, so now you're just under 30 or around there, give or take. Almost 600,000 properties, calls, not enough time, overwork. Where do your inspectors, you have some remote satellite offices for
Yes, we do.
inspectors? Where's your main touchdown for inspectors? MSB building?
You talking about where the busiest district is, or
Just, where do they go?
they,
the end of the day-
they go to their respective district?
Okay. Point is, I'm just trying to say, we are over congested with traffic and construction in the city of Philadelphia. I could probably get down from the northeast twice in a day if necessary. And that's just me with a lot of things. I can't imagine the caseload that each inspector has trying to do their thing, because I consider them first responders at the highest level, keeping our public safety and our general public, the property, and human lives at at the forefront of their responsibility. And they really do the yeoman's work, job of the city of Philadelphia. They don't get enough credit. I don't think we have enough. I do think more inspectors, much more than 10. I know you're talking about it, 10, especially for investigations and audits, which I think is totally necessary, because somebody who's up in age that has a license and applies for a permit and has no employees is being paid off somewhere, right? Now, I'm talking about third-party permits. I'm talking about the underground economy. I'm talking about people who just come into our city, who want to deprive our city of revenue, who want to deprive our city of registration, who want to deprive our city of public safety. All right, we're leaving money on the table in millions when we have to foot the bill for those and penalize people who are doing the right thing. So all the permits, you talk about permits going up. How many permits have been pulled in the city of Philadelphia, or do you anticipate in FY20?
How many permits do we expect in the upcoming?
An increase of 20%?
I would say we'll probably do about 60,000 permits.
Okay, so you have an increase this year, a 10% increase last year, all right, and a 6% increase the year before. So that's gradually going up in permit. They're all people who, maybe they're not all truthful on, the a dollar amount on the permits, but they're abiding by the law by pulling a permit. And that increase is trending with the total economy. Would that be a fair statement?
That sounds reasonable.
That's right. So we're having this increase of construction. You are generating $66.2 million. How many of that revenue that you generate is from permits, licenses, or any other kind of revenue like fines or fees?
I can give you a full breakdown. We don't have it available here. I would say roughly 50-50 between permits and licenses, but we'll be happy to give you that breakdown.
So your budget operational for understaffed inspectors is, and other, complementary and professional staff is just under $30 million. What happens to the other $30 million?
All the money that the department collects goes into the general fund, but we also, we had talked about our relationship with the law department. We also fund employees out of other departments that aren't included in our head count for L&I.
So, speaking of law department, how many violations, how many cases do you get a report from law on violations that go to court?
Yeah, I just got a report with the total number of cases and the amount of fines collected and judgments obtained, money collected in municipal court. It's a pretty comprehensive breakdown, which I will package up and provide
If
to
you
your
would
office.
prepare
Sure.
a package you provide for the chair. In the 2013 legislation that is trying to cut down on illegal and unscrupulous activity and holding people accountable for work safety and for taxes, revenues, and so forth, another part or companion piece of legislation is the private right of action.
Correct.
So has our solicitor's office exercised the tool as a private right of action found it, as you were talking to, having a conversation with Councilwoman Bass, how successful the river wards have been and taking it up to in Mount Airy or other jurisdictions in the city. Has the law department made a decision in taking people or utilizing the private right of action tool that we have that you're aware of?
I haven't had those discussions with the law department about using private right of action.
Right.
I couldn't comment on that.
This is a 6-year-old bill that has a tool that will help L&I and help the people and save. So we've had an increase, I think, as you have, people, other members have been talking about on articles, on studies, and collections of the underground economy and how much cash and unscrupulous work that's being performed and putting people in unsafe conditions we have them here. So we have enough evidence, we have enough data. I think we need to make it a priority to utilize the tools that we do have. Somebody goes on a job site, we'll take a look for the sign, see who the contractors are, see if somebody's paying, see if somebody's licensed or not licensed. They have the OSHA. Are we utilizing our private right of action that was created back in 2013? And fast forward now, with the amount of inspections, we have a stabilized budget for the first time in a long time. And as some of the colleagues are saying, one of the first things that go when we have a downturn in the economy is staff and the workforce in departments in the city of Philadelphia. So we've always cut in departments. We can't cut anymore. We have a stabilized budget. We have the opportunity to prepare for ramping up our enforcement for our first responders and L&I overworked, all right, but working hard, extremely vital and critical enforcement in our neighborhoods, but not just construction, but property maintenance. Average house in our neighborhoods, 82 years old, right? That goes to, our property maintenance inspection as well, including some of these houses when you're doing these constructions. So we have an opportunity, while over the next 5 years, $225 million increase in our wage and net profit tax. $225 million over 5 years. You're collecting $66 million, 30 goes back into the general fund. How about let's put back into L&I, right? Because that's only keeping us safe. That's only expanding us to, allowing us to grow as a city, to lift people up out of poverty, make sure that people are getting real sustainable jobs. So I would encourage that, we continue to have a conversation, a dialogue on what is the minimum requirement amount of inspectors that we need as a city to sustain the type of growth that we've been seeing. I'll wait for the next round. Thank you. Sorry.
I'll come back. Thank you, Councilman. Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Blackwell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I, too, wanted to thank the Commissioner and his department. There's always myriad issues, and different seasons bring different problems. Like right now, we're getting a lot of calls on these rooming houses, and we call and we always get help from the department, and we're grateful for that. And we certainly are supporting that your department gets everything it needs. Who could not be in support of that? So again, we say thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Rose Brown.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, Commissioner.
Good afternoon.
My personal opinion, but you're one of our superstars. Just saying.
Thank you.
And I need you to know that my staff and I appreciate all that you do, and we are going to add to the elephants on your back. You're aware that we've been working hard for the last 18 months looking at this issue called lead.
Yes.
And you also are aware that in Rochester, we learned that every rental property is subject to regular inspection by the city's Department of L&I. In fact, officials in Rochester told us that every single rental property in the city is at least every 6 years they conduct inspections in Rochester. Rochester is a far smaller city, we know that. So given that simply as a backdrop, how many violations has your department issued for rental properties in the past year that specifically relate to lead? And if you can tell us,
Yeah,
of
so,
those, please.
Councilwoman, what the department, our response, or when we do an inspection related to lead, we would report on chipped paint and refer that over to the health department. We don't specifically do the lead inspections ourselves.
Health is responsible for doing the lead inspections.
Right, but if we do, our inspectors are instructed that should they see chip paint, to make that referral over, then the health department goes out and would do the specific lead inspection.
How are those violations ordinarily brought to your attention, the issue of chip paint? How might they come to the attention of you and the professionals in your department?
Yeah, typically, we operate on a complaint basis, so the department has never operated to where we've done regular inspections of dwelling units. If someone calls and says that they have an issue within their dwelling unit, we'll do the inspection, we'll look at the specific complaint that comes in, but we are driven, we are on a complaint-driven process to do our inspections for housing.
And are you able to track, or do you have the capacity to track of those complaints, how many are actually registered by tenants?
Yes, I believe we can do that. I'll have
If
to
you
have
could
our
provide-
data people
That would be
take a
terrific.
look.
Because we've moved 3 lead bills, and we have the more controversial one, and we're still trying to do our homework. And so that information would be useful.
Okay.
What is the difference between a regular rental license and a high-rise license? This is related to another hearing we had in the Committee on Aging.
All right, the high-rise license, that's a per square foot charge on every high-rise building in the city of Philadelphia, regardless of how it's being used. So in order to collect that money, and that money is used specifically to pay for a full life safety inspection of the building in the common areas. So that revenue is collected through the issuance of what we know as a high-rise license. So there's also a rental license,
Yes.
which is separate and different from the high-rise license, which is paid if a unit is being rented out by the particular unit owner or by the building owner.
And with the high-rise license, is there some designation or some threshold by which you all should know that that high-rise is, has as its tenants seniors, the disabled, those who are vulnerable?
Yeah, we wouldn't specifically know that. We would not have a database of a more granular description of the building occupants.
Might that be useful information? And the only reason why I'm asking is in the crisis that took place in West Philadelphia at 3801 Conshohocken, it was a surprise to folk that, well, to the offices of Councilman Jones and myself, that most of the tenants were actually seniors and those who were disabled, although the building itself, well, we learned later that the building was not in compliance. But, so the discovery was tenants were seniors and those who were disabled.
Yeah, I think you have a good idea there, Councilwoman. If perhaps within our high-rise license, we can start pulling out and asking for some information about what the occupancy actually is. So we can say we have so many that are commercial, so many that are residential, so many that cater to certain demographics such as
Yes.
age or disability or, however, other ways that.
That demographic is.
Right.
That's a helpful affirmation, because we were thinking therein lies a gap in the system, and knowing that would be useful to the fire department and others who ultimately had to come on to that site.
Yeah, that would be very helpful. It would certainly raise the level of awareness and need to respond if
Yes.
we knew that we had a high-rise with elderly people in there
Yes.
that all of a sudden was without power. I mean, that's a far more critical crisis than if it was an office building.
Exactly right. And I might add that we did put on the record that the Office of Emergency Planning or Emergency Service, the fire department, and L&I really worked like an orchestra and a song to move those residents out of there. It was horrific. My last question related to this, because the bell has rung. Does your department have a method for flagging a lapsed rental or high-rise certification?
Yes, we know which ones are current. We know which ones are expired.
Okay. All right, then thank you for that.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Greenlee.
President, good afternoon again.
Good afternoon.
These questions are going to ask, relayed to me by Councilman Dom, who couldn't come today, and as you know, he usually has some questions, so I'll relay them to you. First, he says the Community Development Fund is proposed to allocate only $490,000 towards building inspectors in FY20. He says the total amount granted by the federal government to the city is $42.5 million. And his question is, why aren't we allocating more from this grant towards hiring more building inspectors? Does anybody know?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Councilman. It's correct that our proposed FY20 budget has about $490,000 in CDBG funding. That is consistent with recent years. It supports 8 building inspector salaries. The reason why that's it's a number that is somewhat limited by the requirements of that funding. And for example, the building inspector salaries that CDBG funds, those inspectors are in our contractual services unit, which coordinates the demolitions of imminently dangerous properties. So if I'm not mistaken, I believe there are requirements as to working in certain low-income census tracts of the city. I can't speak to the total amount the city receives, but ours has been about $500,000 annually for
So it's
for a
pretty
while.
consistent what it's been? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. The second question, again, I'm not familiar with this, but Chapter 19, Section 3000 of the Philadelphia Code, he said requires any department that issues permits or licenses to file an annual report with the Chief Clerk of Council by the January 31st. And his question is, has the department submitted this report? Again, I'm not, just relaying the question. I'm not familiar with it, so.
Yeah, given the look of surprise on both our faces, I would say we haven't submitted that. We'll take a look at that, Councilman.
Okay, maybe I'll have the councilman's
and
office
find out
back, forward whatever that.
We may already be doing something similar to that. I'll have to check the details and see if we're complying, and if we're not, find out why not.
Okay, all right, thank you. And his final question is, and I'm sure he knows a lot about this issue. He said there are 40,000 unlicensed rental properties in Philadelphia. How is L&I working to identify these properties? I know the question was brought up already, and bring them up to code and get them licensed. Is there a particular program, or has it intensified? And is that figure about what you understand?
I think that number's on the high side. We just ran some numbers, and I may have it here. So if you follow the American Community Survey, which is basically the Census Bureau's analysis of how folks live in Philadelphia and live throughout the country, they report that there's 282,000 rental units in the city of Philadelphia. We have issued 251,000 we've issued licenses that cover 251,000 units. So the gap is about 31,000. Now, it needs to be adjusted because our numbers don't include PHA. There's about 13,000 PHA numbers or units that are out there, but we also have to take out hotels. Long story short, we believe that we've moved the needle from about 79% of all the rental properties in Philadelphia to most recently up to about 85%. And part of that is responding to complaints. Part of it is with bringing Eclipse online. There's easier way for folks to obtain their licenses, less of a built-in disincentive to bypass that process. We believe we're heading in the right direction. We don't think we can ever get to 100% because there's folks out there for a variety of reasons that can't get a rental license for their property. For instance, they may be far behind in their taxes and just can't afford it. We have folks out there that are in tangled title situations. So they've inherited a house, but they don't have clear title. And they may be renting to other folks, and there's no way for those folks to have a rental license. So we think we're getting closer. We think through complaint systems, through inspections, through making the process easier, that we can get closer to that total number that's out there.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman. Got actually one quick question. Good afternoon,
Good afternoon.
And Commissioner, thank you for being one of the two most responsive departments in the city of Philadelphia. You're always on the case, and I like the fact that you show up personally when we either have a community meeting or a walkthrough. And so, again, thank you. And
You're welcome, and thank you.
I want to thank Commissioner Carlton Williams from Streets Department, who also is extremely responsive. Got a question. It was actually it's an old one. I remember early on, before I was council president, we did a bill about windows and doors and these properties that essentially boarded up windows with plywood and who knows what else. And one of the earlier ordinances that I did, and I think Councilman DeChico actually did another one relating to boards and windows, requiring that property owners, commercial property owners, put windows in the upper floors of their structures, primarily because of safety hazards. The fire department has to respond. And not to mention aesthetically, it looks quite ugly when you have these, whatever in these windows. And I think we actually got a challenge in court, but I understand recently that the court overturned that ruling, and the department now has the authority to enforce the doors and windows ordinance that was passed by us. Can you tell me, one, if that's the case, and two, what we're doing to now inspect, particularly along these commercial corridors, inspect and enforce the new initiative we've been given authorization to do?
Yeah, you're correct, Councilman. That bill was passed years ago, and then the city was legally challenged on it, and it was tied up for a number of years. But we're thrilled actually that the court upheld the city in that particular case. We had to put the violations back into what we call our violation catalog. So we are now reissuing those violations that are out there, and we're perfectly capable and willing to issue violations on the appropriate blocks in which the block is otherwise intact except for maybe one or two properties, and those folks can't board their property up. They have to put in working doors and windows. We are back in that game again and can issue those violations. Now, we don't have specific programs to go check each commercial corridor. Generally, if a council person is interested and has a concern about a particular area, we will do a programmatic inspection there, and we also will respond on a complaint basis.
So, all right, I understand, because, as evidenced during the course of this conversation is always the lack of person power for enforcement. But in these retail establishments, because a significant number are actually functioning businesses, that's why it's somewhat of a perplexing why you got a functioning business and why you don't have windows in your buildings on the upper floors. Are they required to get any type of annualized license or permit of some sort to operate a store?
Stores themselves are, if it's a mercantile establishment, there is no additional license. But most places sell packaged food at least, or prepared food. And so there'd be a food license that they would be required to obtain. Stores, mercantile, if they have a dumpster, they're required to have a dumpster license.
Is that a one-time license, or is it an annual?
Yeah, I believe the private dumpster license was just converted over to a one-time issuance. It doesn't need to be renewed. But there is no specific license that is annually renewable for a mercantile establishment.
All right, I'm only asking that question because our ability to enforce it, if there's already some mechanism where on an annual basis, there's a requirement for the property owner to submit and get a license, that enhances our ability to monitor or enforce a property that's not in compliance with the doors and windows bill. I'm just trying to figure out how we get it. So would that be driven by 311 or an inquiry from the council person? I'm just trying to figure, because we got a lot of these stores in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I will put a directive out to the inspectors that if you have any reason to be at a particular location, to always check for doors and windows, issue that violation. We'll talk to the law department about making sure that those violations get prioritized to get into court if the owner doesn't come forth and otherwise comply. I'm a big believer in doors and windows and in preserving block faces.
Right.
And I can support and certainly get behind that effort to make sure that we do everything in our power to get businesses to comply when they should.
All right, so you'll expect to get a significant number of inquiries from us, because in my head I'm looking at a particular commercial corridor right in the heart of my council district, where there are a series of functioning businesses, and every last one of them has plywood or whatever you want to call it up in the upper floors, and they're making money, and I don't know how much, but they're functioning every day, and I don't understand why they can't figure out a way to comply with that law. So
All right, we'll figure it out. That'll be a
Thank
good
you.
project for us.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Heenan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, just to continue on, I just want to, for those who do not understand, or because it seems to be complicated, it's a buzzword, the underground economy. Is your understanding of the underground economy a economy that lies within the overall economy that exists in the city of Philadelphia, lies in a box, all right, that where people are not paying taxes, that are unlicensed, that don't pull permits, and they are committing economic crimes?
I think that's a fair assessment, yes.
Okay. In your, some of the, conversations going back and forth, you had mentioned that you were going to kick some of this over to, I guess, from the investigation and audit unit over to either law or the district attorney. Who makes those decisions?
Now, what I talked about with the district attorney would be contractors that knowingly, willingly risk a catastrophe by doing things that violate the code, in which they were specifically notified not to do, but they did anyway. To me, you've gone beyond just violating the building code. You've gone into another universe.
I think anything above your normal 30, 45-day, going to court, trying to recover, trying to have, a NOV, notice of violation, cured, is putting the public at danger of any kind of, catastrophe. I guess, you could define that. But I do think that if somebody keeps doing that, it certainly falls within a bad behavior that needs to change. And I think that, having enough inspectors to take the time, well, let me strike that. Having enough inspectors with recurring revenue that's collected by the underground economy, all right, that's defrauding not just our city. By the way, I have an article here, and there's a industry mission to collect the construction industry's fraud costs to taxpayers, and they have this up to $2.6 billion a year. That's a lot of money when we're raising taxes, but that could go right back into the department, right? That some of that, not all of it, some of it could go back into enforcement, all right, which will prevent economic crimes, will change behavior, and we do have the tools. Do you think we have the tools on the books now to enforce? It's just sheer, or I would say, a large part of it is maybe not enough enforcement on the street.
Yeah, I think part of the problem has been we just have not had enough people to look at that side of the equation. Our primary role, L&I was created to be a life safety, public safety agency. So all our efforts go into making sure that buildings and construction is safe. But there's also the part where, and I talked about it, the contractors' business practices. That's where we haven't done enough, and which is why we're asking for the 10 positions
Right.
to do more on that side of the equation.
But I agree with you, and I'm so happy that that you're able to, put that kind of rapid response together, because that's what it is. It's responding to, a complaint-driven industry, right? Which has dangerous consequences. But wouldn't enough enforcement to spread out throughout the city of Philadelphia to nearly 600,000 addresses help when it comes to identifying or preempting some of the actual construction scope of work and inspections, not necessarily getting into the revenue part of it, but identifying who was going to be performing the work before you have to inspect the work.
Yeah, I think that the 10 folks that we're asking for will be able to collect data on that and then be able to project what else is out there. And as I said to the budget office when we put the proposal together, was that, look, let's give this a try and see what the return is. If it works, let's keep doing it and make it bigger. If it doesn't work, then we put our efforts into other enforcement activities.
You're a very smart man, and you're doing an incredible job. You understand the business, you understand policy. I think the rate of return far exceeds the upfront investment in revenues that we can capture that we're not capturing. The penalties for some of the things that you say that typically an inspector doesn't look for when they go out in the job is $1,000 per day. Right, that's already a law in the books. It's $1,000 per day. So I would ask if you could go back and take a look. If anybody in enforcement of the contractor legislation in 2013, has any contractor, owner, developer been fined or penalized for not adhering to the law that exists? It's just strictly enforcement and choosing, whether it was a priority or not. So if you could go back and take a look at that, I think it'd be appreciated, and that we can report that back to the chair. Do your inspectors work nights and weekends?
They typically would only work on at nighttime if the project was close to maybe having to have a certificate of occupancy, and there's final testing, and it can only be done while the building wasn't occupied. So we don't regularly work in the evenings. Our emergency duty inspectors, however, are available 24/7. We now have our building inspectors, at least some of them, working on Saturdays, looking for work without permits, illegal construction, double checking jobs that have excavations, doing things that they otherwise couldn't get to during Monday to Friday.
You had mentioned that in some of these constructions, in some of these almost catastrophic, but collapses that have been taking place, some people, either owner, developer, or contractor, or whoever's paying cash and not pulling permits and all that, and defrauding the city, they're doing it because it would cost 3 times possibly the amount more, all right, to do it properly. I don't see how a price tag could be put on people's lives when it comes to people who want to do business in the city of Philadelphia. And I don't see how that is acceptable. And I'm just making a statement, right? This is not you or Department of City. I don't see how it's acceptable, all right, that we will continue to allow people to work for cash and, aren't OSHA trained and don't adhere by the law. Because all we do is enforce the laws that are on the books. So I think we could capture that immensely. One of my last questions is, you have almost $11 million in demolition. Why is that just like, all right, here's $11 million, we anticipate demolition, but then you subcontract that out, right? So the L&I hires somebody. So that's not, I just don't understand why that is actually in your budget, because I think it gets held against you as a department when your budget is much less than it reflects.
Yeah, I think it was put in L&I's budget because the department has abatement powers. So we have the ability to use taxpayers' money to go on the private property to do whatever it takes to make the property safe. So it's the attachment to the abatement powers that moved it into L&I's budget.
I can understand public safety and construction and demolition, but I hope that the finance department doesn't see that $11 million, or someone else sees that $11 million for demolition. Well, look at what L&I has, right? When we were down 54 vacancies in inspectors, and you're trying to ramp up, and we fall awfully short on the amount that we actually need. I just want to state for the record that the department should not be held to that kind of revenue when it's not actually going out in enforcement or operations.
It's outside of the scope of what a traditional building department does. Building department would do building inspections, issue building permits. The abatement piece is done by code enforcement agencies and not necessarily by the building department. But since we're like a jack of all trades, it's in our shop.
Council President is there somebody after me?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. I'll certainly
ahead.
bounce it back to you.
You bet.
So point of information, Councilman Heenan, where might you argue would or should we place the 11 million? Where might be a more appropriate fit for those dollars?
My pointing that out is that that's not operational budget. It's more of a capital with the operational budget, enforcing it and overseeing it maybe. But it's not necessarily inspectors or plan reviews or anything else that's maintaining public safety and a first responder kind of kind of job description, right?
Okay.
There is no job description on that. It's eminently dangerous. It's the demolition that L&I has identified that needs to be demoed.
I
think
see.
over the past couple of years, we've put in I think a few years ago, we put in $3 million and we put $5 million. Now it's up to $11 million, which just goes to show that there's an increase, a tremendous amount of
Need.
increase of development that's going on in the city and how old and aging our
Buildings.
housing stock is.
Well taken. Okay. Back to the issue of lead. One of our discoveries over the last 18 months, and talking with the folks in Rochester and visiting with the folks in Baltimore, we learned that we as a government may not be doing our best when it comes to keeping landlords informed about issues like lead. So speak to us about how often does your office communicate expectations about housing quality to new and returning landlords? Because of course the goal is always to get rid of the bad guys.
Yeah, we obviously we have email addresses and postal addresses of all the folks out there that have rental licenses. When there is a change, we notify them. We also maintain a booklet that has all the L&I requirements around housing, called Partners for Good Housing, that we make available to all the landlords that are out there. The communication is on an as-needed basis. As the rules
Okay,
change,
as needed.
we notify folks.
Okay. So might it be fair to say then that training is on an as-needed basis as well?
Training,
Yes, around lead and its impact and the devastating impact it has, and why, if you have a building that was built before 1978, you need to be doing A, B, C, D, F, G.
yeah. When it comes to the lead issue itself, we've always considered that to be it's a health crisis. It's a health issue, and our position is that we're not the experts in being able to quantify the risks that are there, and it's really a health department
And so that-
issue to educate, to provide information.
Okay.
Now, we certainly will allow the health department and we'll assist them in using our infrastructure
Okay.
to get the word out. We're there. We work closely with Dr. Farley, but those materials really need to be developed by the health department, and we'll be more than happy to distribute them and send them through our network.
That's instructive. So the struggle with us trying to get to this last bill and meeting with the members of HAPCO and BIA and the Apartment Association is, as you well know, how do we track down, can we get to the bad guys? Any other ideas you can simply put on the record for this forum on, given all that we do already, we still know that there are bad guys out there because every year 1,500 children are being poisoned. And so, so do you believe we've exhausted every avenue to date which moves us towards getting to those who are in violation, who are not registered, who are not licensed? What are we not doing? What more could we do?
Yeah, beyond just the rental properties, there are folks in a low-income situation that are living in a non-rental situation, such as the tangled title that I'm talking about. So they run completely under the radar. I don't know how we get to those folks. I think we really need to have a program where we can have folks straighten out their title problems with their property. Because if you have a tangled title, you're shut out from the license process.
Okay.
You're shut out from getting loans to fix your problems. I mean, they are basically adrift on their own island. And we need to help those folks. We need to get them the proper title they need so that they can then move forward. So we talk all about enforcing on rental properties. Well, what about folks that are in a non-rental situation?
That is very, very instructive. And that particular community has not come up in the conversations we've had over the past 18 months. So that's very, 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 very helpful. My only last observation is I intentionally do
a scope of what departments look like based on what's in the record and whether or not a department looks like the city we live in? Are all these professionals with you?
Yes, they are.
Thank you for having a department that looks like Philadelphia, men and women in positions of leadership and responsibility across your department. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Councilman Heenan?
I do, and I want to close out
Okay.
on my end. Commissioner, last year we were able to adopt, with the department's, hard work over the past 9 years, adopt the 2018 codes. How is that going, and how is the notification and education part of informing the people performing work in the city of Philadelphia in advance, that the codes are finally updated after 9 years?
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank you, Council. I know you took a personal interest in this and was very helpful in advising us and getting the legislation together. We are now in the 2018 cycle. The cutoff date for getting projects reviewed under the old code or the new code is now passed. So everything that we are now doing is under the newer codes. And the transaction went, I would say, pretty smooth. We didn't get very many complaints. There were a few folks that beat the clock to get in right before the code changed, and so they could get around some of the sustainability requirements. But shame on them. It was a legal way to do it, and that we can't stop. But we are fully in now with the 2018 codes, which is where we should be as a first-class city. It was a disgrace that our codes were 9 years out of date, and basically we were held hostage by the
By Harrisburg politics.
There you go. You said it better than I could.
It's a shame politics played part in, our public safety codes and the ability to adopt them. So I'm glad that's moving forward. I'm going to end on, are you aware, two things. You are aware, I'm sure, that other jurisdictions in, not just other jurisdictions in the Commonwealth, as well as the country, has the building code enforcement and permit construction department separated into its own entity from other departmental responsibilities.
Yeah, that's typically the norm. The building department is the building department, and the fire code inspection is by the fire department, and code enforcement and abatement is by the code enforcement agency, and community affairs and business licensing is by another group.
Wow.
We're a jack of all trades. We do it all.
You are, and where you had 700-800 employees, it's far short of that now. And I point that out that we are not the norm, because Council President, led by Council President leadership and the members of this body, adopted a housing reorganization with our departments in the city of Philadelphia. And I think that it's, the situation and the structure and the organizational chart that we have with L&I may be something that we take a look at over the summer, because it is my intention to make sure that your employees who are keeping our public and property safe in the city of Philadelphia as first responders have all the tools they need. All right. You have the staff that is going to take the caseload off of our inspectors. All right, so they don't have to be overworked and overstressed, because they understand that the magnitude of what their responsibility are to enforce the laws that we have on the books and the tools that we have at our disposal. So it is my goal, all right, to have those conversations. All right, it's my goal to make sure that we have the proper amount, responsible amount of inspectors at a minimum standard, not 74. I think that's awfully short. All right. for the construction end, not including the property maintenance. And so, because of our housing stock, the aging of our housing stock, to have a minimum amount of inspectors to do that, and have a sounding board for a complaint-driven industry, whether it's a contractor licensing board or a complaint board, all right, and, recurring revenue going back into the department. So, we all are district council members and at large, we all want commercial corridor enforcements, right, which I think you have the business services back up and running, which I'm glad that, of our commercial corridors, and I think you do a good job at that. But, we need to keep, pushing forward and reforming and taking a look at other ways to reshape how we, protect and serve the city of Philadelphia. So my goal is to continue to work with you, all right? And I do want to compliment you on all the accomplishments, because L&I has done tremendous things. And I look forward to Eclipse being online. I look forward to using the tools, handhelds, which I think will be a part of one of the phases. Or so our inspectors, when we add 200-300 more, all right, inspectors on the streets, they have handhelds, and they don't have to come down in Center City and have to be worried about if they're going to get down here, in 2 hours,
Yeah.
right, because of the congestion that we have with our traffic, because I think it's a problem. And ultimately, unless their, inspectors are working in this geographic area in Center City, they should be out in the field. They should be out in the field in satellite L&I offices doing the work that they signed up for. And we, as a council and the legislative body working with the mayor's office, continue to give their revenue and the tools to do the job that you signed up for. So thank you so much for all you do.
Thank you, Councilwoman. We appreciate the support.
Ditto to Councilman Heenan. There being no further questions, this committee will stand in recess until Monday, April 15th, 2019 at 10 a.m., at which time we will reconvene in room 400 City Hall. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Appreciate it.